travels in higher species of life and sometimes in lower species. He has been wandering within this material universe since time immemorial, as explained by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavanya Bhagavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Bija. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 19.156. The living entity wanders into many species of life, but he is fortunate when he once again meets his friend, either in person or through his representative, meaning meeting Krishna or his representative. Actually, it is Krishna who personally advises all living entities to return home back to Godhead. Sometimes Krishna sends his representative, who, delivering Krishna's very message, canvasses all living entities to return home back to Godhead. Unfortunately, the living entity is so greatly attached to material enjoyment that he does not take the instruction of Krishna or his representative very seriously. This material tendency is mentioned in this verse as gramya mati, sense gratification. The word mahim means within this material world. All living entities within this material world are sensually inclined. Consequently, they become they become entangled in different types of bodies and suffer the pangs of material existence. Text number 56. One second. One second. I'll be right back. Okay. Text number 56. In that city, meaning the material body, there are 5 gardens, 9 gates, 1 protector, 3 apartments, 6 families, 5 stories, 5 material elements, and 1 woman who is lord of the house. Text 57. There's no purport to 56. My dear friend, the 5 gardens are the 5 objects of sense enjoyment. And the protector is the life air, which passes through the 9 gates. The 3 apartments are the chief ingredients: fire, water, and earth. The 6 families are the aggregate total of the mind and the 5 senses. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The 5 senses that acquire knowledge are sight, taste, smell, sound, and touch. And these act through the 9 gates: the 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, 2 nostrils, 1 genital, and 1 rectum. These holes are compared to gates in the walls of the city. The principal ingredients are earth, water, and fire. And the principal actor is the mind, which is controlled by intelligence or buddhi. Okay, well, that's a very nice explanation. So let me read it again. The five senses that acquire knowledge are sight, taste, smell, sound, and touch. And these act through the nine gates: the two eyes, two ears, one mouth, two nostrils, one genital, and one rectum. These holes are compared to gates in the walls of the city. The principal ingredients are earth, water, and fire, and the principal actor is the mind, which is controlled by the intelligence. Okay, very clear explanation. Text 58. The five stores are the five working sensory organs. They transact their business through the combined forces of the five elements, which are eternal. Behind all this activity is the soul. The soul is a person and an enjoyer in reality. However, because he is now hidden within the city of the body, he is devoid of knowledge. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The living entity enters the material creation with the aid of the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And thus his body is formed. Although the living entity is working from within, he is nonetheless unknown. The living entity enters the material creation, but because he is bewildered by the material energy, he appears to be hidden. The bodily conception of life is prominent because of ignorance, or Nava Budayate. Intelligence is described in the feminine gender, but owing to her prominence in all activities, she is described in this verse as Adhisha, the controller. The living entity lives by means of fire, water, and food grains. It is through the combination of these three that the body is maintained. Consequently, body is called Prakriti. So it's very nice. It doesn't say meat. It says the living entity lives by means of fire, water, and food grains. But it doesn't say meat or liquor or anything else like that. Consequently, the body is called Prakriti, material creation. All the elements gradually combine to form flesh, bone, blood, and so on. All these appear as various apartments. It is said in the Vedas that the digested foods are ultimately derived into three. The solid portion becomes stool. The semi-liquid portion turns into flesh, and the liquid portion turns yellow and is again divided into three. One of these liquid portions is called urine. Similarly, the fiery portion is divided into three, and one is called bone. Out of the five elements, fire, water, and food grains, are very important. These three, in other words, fire, water, and food grains, are very important. These three are mentioned in the previous verse, whereas sky or ether and air are not mentioned. This is all explained in the Bhagavad Gita 13.20. Pakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidi Anadi Ubhav Api Vikramams Cha Gunanams Chaiva Vidyam Pakriti Sambhavan. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. That means that they always have been existing. Their transformations and modes of matter are products of material nature. Prakriti, or material nature, and Purusha, the living entity, are eternal. When they both come in contact, there are different reactions and manifestations. All of them should be considered the results of the interaction of the three modes of material nature. So that means they become entangled in the three modes of material nature. Text 59. My dear friend, when you enter such a body along with the woman of material desires, you become overly absorbed in sense enjoyment. Because of this, you have forgotten your spiritual life. Due to your material conceptions, you are placed in various miserable conditions. Well, this is the situation of a person who is attached to enjoying life with a woman and forgetting about spiritual life. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. When a person becomes materially engrossed, he has no capacity to hear about spiritual existence. Forgetfulness of spiritual existence entangles a man more and more in material existence. Such is the result of sinful life. Various bodies are developed with the material ingredients because of different types of sinful activities. King Pranjana assumed the body of a woman, Vaidarvi, as a result of his sinful activities. Bhagavad Gita clearly says, Striyo Vaishas Tata Sudra, that such a body is lowborn if one takes shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, he can be elevated to the highest perfection, even though he be lowborn. One acquires the lower births when one's spiritual intelligence is reduced. Text number 60. Actually, you are not the daughter of Vaidarbha, nor is this man, Malaya Dvaja, your well-wisher husband, nor were you the actual husband of Puranjani. You were simply captivated in this body of 9 gates. Wow. Okay, so this is trying to teach us what is the real situation of a person who's enamored or confused by sense gratification in the material world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this material world, Many living entities come into contact with one another and increasing their attachment to a particular type of body become related to as father, husband, mother, wife, etc. Actually, every living entity is a separate individual being. And it is because of his contact with matter that he comes together with other bodies and becomes falsely related. Yeah, fathers, mothers, uncles, aunties, all kinds of people. False bodies create various associations in the name of family, community, society, and nationality. Actually, every living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the living entities are overly engrossed in the material body. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, appears and gives instructions in the form of Bhagavad Gita and Vedic literatures. The Supreme Lord gives these instructions because he is the eternal friend of the living entities. His instructions are important because by them, the living entity can obtain liberation from bodily engagement. As water passes down to a river, many straws and grasses are carried from the shore. These straws and grasses come together in the river's current. But when the waves toss this way and that, they are separated and carried somewhere else. Similarly, the innumerable living entities within the material world are being carried by the waves of material nature. Sometimes the waves bring them together and they form friendships and relate to one another on a bodily basis of family, community, or nationality. Eventually, they are thrown out of the association by the waves of material nature. This process has been going on since the creation of material nature. In this regard, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings, Miche Mayavase Yat Chabase Kacha Habudubudavai Jiva Krishna Dasa E Vishvasa Karlita Aradu Kanai. My dear living entities, you are being carried away by the waves of material nature. Sometimes you are on the surface. Sometimes you are being drowned. In this way, your eternal life is being spoiled. If you simply catch hold of Krishna and take shelter of his lotus feet, you will once again get free from all all the miserable material conditions. In this verse, the word Srit, well-wisher, and Tava, you, are very significant. One's so-called husband relative, son, father, or whatever cannot actually be a well-wisher. The only actual well-wisher is Krishna himself, as Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita 5:29, Suhridam Sarvabhutanam. Society, one second. Okay. Society, friendship, love, and well-wishers are all simply results of being packed in different bodies. One should know this well and try to get out of this bodily encagement into which one is thrown, birth after birth. One should take shelter of the Supreme Personality Godhead Krishna and return home back to Godhead. Well, you have to uh, be free of false uh, desires and false, uh, let's say, participation in family and different types of attachments that one evolves in the material world. One must be aloof of temporary material attachments, understanding that they are temporary and they're not eternal. The genuine devotee is always interested in what is sat, eternal. And what is not eternal, well, he or she is not attached to things that are not eternal. Although one may uh, use them in one way or another, but they are not attached, knowing very well that they're not eternal. They are going to disappear at some point, like a car or a house or a family. All these things, all these people will eventually disappear by birth, death, old age, disease, etc. So the devotee is a stoic, is not influenced by the disappearance of family members, etc. Okay, text 61. Maya hi esa Maya Shrista, yet pur nam sam striyam satim. Manyase no by yum yed vai ham so pas yavayor gatim. Sometimes you think yourself a man, sometimes a chaste woman, and sometimes a neutral eunuch. A eunuch is usually a man who is not capable of having sex. This is all because of the body, which is created by the illusory energy. This illusory energy is my potency. And actually, both of us, you and I, are pure spiritual identities. Now, just try to understand this. I am trying to explain our factual position. Yeah, we are all, our factual position is to be the eternal servant of Krishna. That is our pure spiritual identities. Any other identity will be misleading. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The factual position of both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity is qualitatively one. Yeah, they are both eternal living entities. The Supreme Lord is the Supreme Spirit, the Super Soul, and the living entity is the individual spiritual soul. Even though both of them are original spiritual identities, the living entity forgets his identity when he comes in contact with material nature and becomes conditioned. At such a time, he identifies himself as a product of the material nature. Because of the material body, he forgets that he is the eternal or Sanatana part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is confirmed in this way. Mamayavam so Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. The word Sanatana is found in several places in Bhagavad Gita. Both the Lord and the living entity are Sanatana, eternal. And there is also a place known as Sanatana, beyond this material nature. The real residence of both the living entity and God is the domain of Sanatana, meaning the domain of eternal existence. Not this material world. The material world is temporary, external energy of the Lord. And the living entity is placed in the material world because he wanted to imitate the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this material world, he tries to enjoy his senses to his best capacity. All the activities of conditioned soul within this material world are perpetually taking place in different types of bodies. But when the living entity acquires developed consciousness, he should try to rectify the situation and again become a member of the spiritual world. Okay. The process by which one can return home back to Godhead is bhakti yoga, sometimes called Sanatana Dharma. Instead of accepting a temporary occupational duty based on the material body, one should take to the process of Sanatana Dharma, the eternal duty of the living entity. This is also called Bhakti Yoga, Sanatana Dharma, or Bhakti Yoga, so that he can put an end to his perpetual bondage in material bodies. That's no fun. The material body is not a real asset, it is a liability because it's destined to get old, sick, and die. So he can put an end to this perpetual bondage in material bodies and return home back to Godhead. As long as human society works on the basis of false material identification, all the so-called advancements of science and philosophy are simply useless. Wow, there it is. They only serve to mislead the human society. Anda yatan, anda yatandair upa yan mana. In the material world, the blind simply lead the blind. That's correct. That's definitely true. Look at Hitler. He was able to fool hundreds and millions of people by his ability to speak. And it ended up in a disaster. So many people died because of him. And there are many other examples like this also. Throughout history, uh, the uh, the blind simply lead the blind. Unfortunately, uh, some blind people learn to speak very convincingly, but they completely mislead the people who are not savvy enough or educated enough to see through that falsity, and thus it ruins their life. Yeah, people who smoke cigarettes and cigars, people who engage in illicit sex, people who cheat and lie, people who are always morose and confused about the purpose of life. So many categories of people are unnecessarily misled by blind people, and it ruins their life. Text 62. My dear friend, I, the super soul, and you, the individual soul, are not different in quality. Yeah, they're both eternal. For we are both spiritual. In fact, my dear friend, you are qualitatively not different from me in your constitutional position. We're not equal to Krishna, but we are qualitatively uh, uh, not different from Krishna. Yeah, we have an eternal soul. Just try to consider this subject. Those who are actually advanced scholars, who are in knowledge, do not find any qualitative differences between you and me. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. 1 second, please. Both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity are qualitatively one. Yeah, they're both spirit souls, eternal. There is no factual difference between the two. The Mayavadi philosophers are again and again defeated by the illusory energy because they think that there is no separation between the super soul and the individual soul, or that there is no spiritual soul. They are also misled in thinking that everything is the super soul. Well, that's a lot of misconceptions. However, those who are kavaya, learned scholars, actually know the facts. What's the facts? What are the facts? We are all part and parcel of Krishna. And we are all meant to be engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. And we are not a product of material nature. Material nature is foreign to the living entity. Only in being under the influence of ignorance do people identify with the body and thus are duped and engage in sense gratification and waste their opportunity to be free from cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. And they continue in that vicious cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease due to their false ego, thinking themselves to be the controller and the uh, happy person uh, engaged in sense gratification. But actually, sense gratification is miserable, but they think it's very nice. So, therefore, they become addicted to things that are horrible, but due to their confusion and their sinfulness, they think nasty things are nice. It's just like uh, a person who eats dead bodies. He thinks it's nice eating dead bodies. What kind of dead bodies? Meat, fish, eggs, and all kinds of other horrible things. He actually thinks they're good, and he looks forward to eating such things. But actually, they're abominable. But he cannot understand that they're abominable. Why? Because he's completely in illusion. So it says here, however, those who are kavaya, learned scholars, actually know the facts. They do not commit such mistakes. They know that God and the individual soul are one in quality, but that the individual soul falls under the clutches of Maya, whereas the super soul, the supreme personality of Godhead, is the controller of Maya. Maya is the creation of the Supreme Lord, Maya Shrishta. Therefore, the Supreme Lord is the controller of Maya. Although one in quality with the Supreme Lord, the individual soul is under the control of Maya. Mayavadi philosophers cannot distinguish between the controller and the controlled. Well, the controller is Krishna, and the controlled are the living entities. But the Mayavadi philosophers equate the two and therefore become completely flummoxed, confused in the material world. Text 63. As a person sees the reflection of his body in a mirror to be one with himself and not different, whereas others actually see two bodies. So, in our material condition, in which the living being is affected and yet not affected, there is a difference between God and the living entity. Now, that's a very interesting verse. Let me read that again. As a person sees the reflection of his body in a mirror to be one with himself and not different, whereas others actually see two bodies. So, in our material condition, in which the living being is affected and yet not affected, there is a difference between God and the living entity. Okay, so let's read the purport. There's a very interesting purport. Wherever there is an explanation of the illusory things that people accept as true, but are not true. There's always a long purports. Yeah, because to differentiate between what is real and what is false requires very, let's say, detailed information. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Being affected by the conditioning of matter, Mayavadi philosophers cannot see the difference between the Supreme Lord and the living entity. When the sun is reflected in a pot of water, the sun knows that there is no difference between himself and the reflected sun in the water. Those in ignorance, however, perceive that there are many small suns reflected in each and every pot. As far as the brilliance is concerned, there is brilliance both in the original sun and in the reflections, but the reflections are small, whereas the original sun is very large. Vaishnava philosophers conclude that the living entity is simply a small sample of the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. Qualitatively, God and the living entities are one, but quantitatively, the living entities are small fragments of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Lord is full, powerful, and opulent. In the previous verse, the Lord says, "My dear friend, you and I are not different." This non-difference refers to qualitative oneness, for it was not necessary for the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality, to remind the conditioned soul that he is not one in quality. Well, he's not one in quality, uh, and nor is he one in quantitative sense. The self-realized soul never thinks that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He never thinks that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Let's see, wait a minute. The self-realized soul never thinks that he and the Supreme Personality, Godhead, are one in every respect. Although he and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are one in quality, but not in quantity. The living entity is prone to forget his spiritual identity. It's because of his littleness. Whereas the Supreme Personality, Godhead, never forgets due to his greatness. This is the difference between lipta and alipta. The Supreme Personality, Godhead, is eternally alipta, uncontaminated by the external energy. The conditioned soul, however, being in contact with material nature, forgets his real identity. Therefore, when he sees himself in the conditioned state, he identifies himself with the body. For the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, there is no difference between the body and the soul. let me read that again. For the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, there is no difference between the body and the soul. He is completely soul. He has no material body. Although the supersoul, Paramatma, and the individual soul are both within the body, the supersoul is devoid of designation, whereas the conditioned soul is designated by its particular type of body. The supersoul, called Antaryami, and he is extensive. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 13.3. Kshetragyam chapimam vidi sarvachetresu bharata. O Skyana Bharata, you should understand that I am the knower in all bodies. The supersoul is present in everyone's body, whereas the individual soul is conditioned in one particular type of body. The individual soul cannot understand what is taking place in another's body, but the super soul knows very well what is happening in all bodies. In other words, the super soul is always present in his full spiritual position, whereas the living soul is prone to forget himself. Nor is the individual soul present everywhere. Generally, in his conditioned state, the individual soul cannot understand his relationship with the supersoul. But sometimes, when he is free from all conditional existence, he can see the real difference between the supersoul and himself. When the supersoul tells the conditioned soul, you and I are one and the same, it is to remind the conditioned soul of his spiritual identity as being qualitatively one. In the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said, that is 3:28-40. Yatol mukad vishpulingad dumad vapi swasambhavat api at mat vina vina vi bini matad yata guni pritag mukat. Fire has different features. There is flame, sparks, and smoke. Although these are one in quality, there is still a difference between the fire, the flame, and spark. The living entity becomes conditioned, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead is different because he does not become conditioned at any point. In the Vedas, it is stated, Atma tata pritag drasta Bhagavan Brahma Samganita. Atma is the individual soul as well as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the seer of everything. Although both are spirit, there's always a difference. In the Smriti, it is also said, Yatagne Kshudra Vishpulinga Vyucharanti. Just as sparks manifest in a large fire, similarly, the small individual souls are present in the big spiritual flame. In Bhagavad Gita 9.4, Lord Krishna says, Matstani Sarvabhutani Na Chaham Te Swastiti Vastita, Avastita, I'm sorry. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. Although all living beings are resting in him, as small fiery sparks rest on a large flame, both are differently situated. Similarly, in the Vishnu Purana, it is said, Ekadesa Stitasya Agner Josna Vistarini Yata Parasya Brahmana Saktis Tatedam Akilam Jagat. Fire is situated in one place, but it distributes heat and light. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is distributing his energies in different ways. The living entity is but one of these energies, and it's the marginal. Marginal means it's in the middle. It's not exactly one or the other, but it's in the middle. Okay. The energy and the energetic are in one sense. Are one in one sense, but they are differently situated as energy and energetic. Similarly, the Sach Chitananda form confirmed in Brahma Samhita, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha, is different from that of the living entity in both his conditioned and liberated states. Only atheists consider the living entity and the personality of Godhead equal in all respects. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, Mayavadi Bashya Sunili Haya Sarvanasa. If one follows the instructions of Mayavadi philosophers and believes that the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the individual soul are one, his understanding of real philosophy is forever doomed. In other words, if a person accepts Mayavad philosophy, they will never understand Krishna consciousness. And that's a fact. So we have to be very careful not to be duped by the Mayavadis who try and make everything equal, but nothing is equal. Krishna is the Supreme Personality. Godhead, no one is equal or greater than Krishna. Everyone is subordinate to Krishna. But the Mayavadis want to make everything equal. So that's a false narrative. They call each other, what is it? They think everybody is a god. But no, that's not true. Everybody is the servant of God. Yes, that's true. But everybody is not God. But they refer to each other as God. That is their false identification. Text 64. In this way, both swans live together in the heart. When one swan is instructed by the other, he is situated in his constitutional position. This means he regains his original Krishna consciousness, which was lost because of his material attraction. Yeah. So when we come in contact with a genuine guru, he can uh, dissipate all the false ideas that we have assumed and get us on the right track to go back to Godhead. Here is clearly stated, Hamso Hamsena Pratibodhita, the individual soul and the super soul are both compared to swans or Hamsa because they are white or uncontaminated. One swan, however, is superior and is the instructor of the other. When the inferior swan is separated from the other swan, he is attracted to material enjoyment. This is the cause of his fall down. When he hears the instructions of the other swan, he understands his real position and is again revived to his original consciousness. The Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna comes down, Avatara, to deliver his devotees and kill the demons. Well, he kills them, but it just changes their body. They never really die. He also gives his sublime instructions in the form of Bhagavad Gita. The individual soul has to understand his position by the grace of the Lord and the spiritual master, because the text of Bhagavad Gita cannot be understood simply by academic qualifications. Very major statement. One has to learn Bhagavad Gita from a realized soul. Tad vidipalipatena paripasnena sevaya upadekshyanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Bhagavad Gita 4.34. Thus, one has to select a bona fide spiritual master and become enlightened to his original consciousness. In this way, the individual soul can understand that he is always subordinate to the Supreme Lord. As soon as he declines to remain subordinate and tries to become an enjoyer, he begins his material. He begins his material conditioning. When he abandons the spirit of being an individual owner or enjoyer, he becomes situated in his liberated state. The word swa-sita, meaning situated in one's original position, is very significant in this verse. When one gives up his unwanted attitude of superiority, he becomes situated in his original position. The word tad vyabhicharena is also significant, for it indicates that when one is separated from God due to disobedience, his real sense is lost. Again, by the grace of Krishna and Guru, he can be properly situated in his liberated position. These verses are spoken by Srila Narada Muni, and his purpose in speaking them is to revive our consciousness. Although the living entity and the supersoul are one in quality, the individual soul has to pursue the instruction of the supersoul. That is the state of liberation. Okay. What time is it? Okay,
7:40.
Huh?
7:40, Maharaj.
7:40. We still have some time then.
Yeah.
Text number 65. My dear King Parsanabharti, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes, is celebrated to be known indirectly. Thus, I have described the story of Puranjana to you. Well, why does it say celebrated to be known indirectly? Well, Puranjana doesn't really exist. He's just uh, used as an example, right? Actually, it is an instruction for self-realization. There it is. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are many similar stories in the Puranas for self-realization. As stated in the Vedas, Paroksha Priya Eva Hi Deva. There are many stories in the Puranas that are intended to interest ordinary men and in transcendental subjects. But actually, these refer to real facts. They are not to be considered stories without a transcendental purpose. Some of them refer to real historical facts. One should be interested, however, in the real purport of the story. Indirect instruction is quickly understandable for a common man. Factually, the path of Bhakti Yoga is the path of hearing directly about the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Shravanam Kirtanam Drishya. But those who are not interested in hearing directly about the activities of the Lord or who cannot understand them can very effectively hear such stories and fables as this one narrated by Narada Muni. And that's the story of King Parsanabharti. The following is a glossary of some of the important words in this chapter. That's interesting. Yeah. Adesakari, the actions resulting from sinful activities. Agastya, the mind. Amatya, the governor of the senses, the mind. Arbuda, various types of Shravana and Kirtana of the Supreme Lord's name, quality, form, and so on. Adi, impediments like disease. Moga, enjoyment. Herein, this word refers to real enjoyment in spiritual life. Britya, the servants of the body, namely the senses. Dravida Raja, devotional service or person eligible to act in devotional service. Dvara, the doors of the body, such as the eyes and ears. Griha, home. For spiritual cultivation, one requires an undisturbed place or the good association of devotees. Idmavaha, the devotee who approaches the supreme spirit, the spiritual master. Idma refers to wood that is taken to burn as fuel for a fire. A brahmachari is supposed to take this idma to ignite the fire used in performing sacrifice. By spiritual instruction, a brahmachari is trained to ignite a fire and offer oblations in the morning. An oblation is an offering of something. He is supposed to go to the spiritual master to take lessons on transcendental subject matter. And the Vedic injunctions is that, and the Vedic instruction is, no, I'm sorry, and the Vedic instruction is that when approaching the spiritual master, one must carry with him fuel to perform yagyas or sacrifices. The exact Vedic injunction is as follows. Tad vikanartam sagurum iva vikichet samit panishrotyam brahmanistam. To learn transcendental subject matter, one must approach the spiritual master. In doing so, he should carry fuel to burn in sacrifice. The symptom of such a spiritual master is that he is expert in understanding the Vedic conclusion, and therefore he constantly engages in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mukunda Upanishad 1.2.12. By serving such a bona fide spiritual master, gradually a conditioned soul becomes detached from material enjoyment and invariably makes progress in spiritual realization under the direction of the spiritual master. Those who are misled by the illusory energy are never interested in approaching a spiritual master to make life successful. Okay, so there are more definitions of words. Jaya means intelligence. Jirna Sarpa, the fatigued air of life. Kalakanya, the invalidity of old age. Kama, a high fever. Kulachala, the place where there is no disturbance. Kutumbini, intelligence. Madirekshana. Madirekshana refers to one whose eyes are so attractive that one who observes them becomes maddened by her. In other words, Madirekshana means a very beautiful young girl. According to Jiva Goswami, one second. According to Jiva Goswami, Madirekshana means the personified deity of bhakti. If one is attracted by the bhakti cult, he becomes engaged in the service of the Lord and the spiritual master, and thus his life becomes successful. Vaidarbhi, the woman, became a follower of her husband. As she left her comfortable home for the service of her husband, a serious student of spiritual understanding must give up everything for the service of the spiritual master. Very important statement. As stated by Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakura, Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada. If one wants actual success in life, he must strictly follow the instructions of the spiritual master. By following such instructions, one is sure to make rapid progress in spiritual life. This statement by Vishwanatha Chakravarti is in pursuance of the following injunction from the Swataswatara Upanishad 6.23. Yasya deve para bhaktir yata deve tata guru tashyate tatita hiyarta prakasante mahatmana. Only unto those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master are all the imports of Vedic knowledge automatically revealed. Very important verse. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it is said, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, one who approaches a bona fide spiritual master can understand everything about spiritual realization. Okay, another translation of a word. Malaya Dvaja, a nice devotee who is like sandalwood. Panchala, the five sense objects. Parichada, the total aggregate of the senses. Pura Jana, the seven elements that constitute the body. Potra, patience and gravity. Prajvara, a kind of fever called Vishnu Jwara. Pratikriya, counteracting agents such as mantras and medicines. Pura Palaka, the life air. Putra, consciousness. Sainka, the condition of threefold miseries. This Sapta Sutta, the seven sons, namely hearing, chanting, remembering, offering prayers, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, worshiping the deity, and becoming a servant of the Lord. So Hridya, endeavor. Sutta, son of Vaidarbhi, or in other words, one who is somewhat advanced in fruitive activities and who comes in contact with the devotee spiritual master. Such a person becomes interested in the subject matter of devotional service. Vaidarbhi, the woman was formerly a man, but took birth as a woman in his next life because of too much attachment to women. Dharma means kusa grass. In fruitive activities or karma kandiya ceremonies, one requires kusha grass. This Vaidarbhi refers to one who takes birth in a family of karma kandiya understanding. However, if by karma kanda activities one by chance in contact and one by chance comes in contact with a devotee, as Vaidarbi did when she married Malaya Dvaja, his life becomes successful. He then pursues the devotional service of the Lord. The conditioned soul becomes liberated simply by following the instructions of the bona fide spiritual master. Vidarbha Rajasimha, the best persons who are expert in fruitive activities. Virya, one who has mercy. Yavana, the servant of Yamaraja. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the fourth canto, 28th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Puranjana becomes a woman in the next life. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you very much, my dear devotees. All these stories, some of them are factual, some of them are meant to instruct us even though they might not be factual, but they are instructive. So by reading this and hearing this, we become educated in how to live without becoming illusioned by Maya in this material world. This is the problem people have in the material world. They become illusioned by Maya. But to break that false understanding, one requires to hear all these stories and examples, and to understand from many different points of view the necessity to be Krishna conscious all the time, under the tutelage of bona fide yogi, bona fide guru or gurus, and also to always be engaged in devotional service and avoid the association of unholy people. Very important if you want to have a spiritual life. If you don't want to have a spiritual life, then you can associate with unholy people and ruin your life. But if you want to have a spiritual life, you have to avoid the association of unholy people. Okay, well, thank you very much, my devotees. Are there any questions or comments about what we have read today? We read a lot of things. Yes. Anybody have a question or comment or a realization? Okay, no questions, no comments. Thank you very much, my dear devotees. Please chant Hare Krishna and be happy. And
Hare Krishna, Harivilas Maharaj, Dandavat. I have a question. You at the end of your class, you talked about disassociating with unholy people, but sometimes we have family members, relatives who are not following Krishna consciousness, but we have to see them and hang out with them. How do we handle that situation? Thank you.
it's very easy. Don't see them and don't have anything to do with them. Yeah, I had relatives that were really horrible, and they made fun of me because I was a devotee. So I avoided their association. You are understood by who you associate with. So if you associate with unholy people, then people take it for granted that you are also unholy. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, I'm trying to convince these people, these relatives, to become holy. Oh, well, all right. That you might try, but sometimes they are so far in illusion. And by the way, no one is a saint in his own country. That's a saying. Because people say, well, I remember when you were a kid and you were doing this and you were doing that. And now you think that you're some big guy, a spiritual person. So no one is a saint in his own country. So so it's difficult to convince your family members who knew you when you were a kid and let's say a a and and also when you were in high school or college and maybe you were not Krishna conscious at that time, they will always remember that and oftentimes they don't take your sincerity of being a devotee and they think it's just a ploy and not real. However, if you're consistently Krishna consciousness and never deviate, then your relatives might accept you as a genuine person. But at the first sign of nonsense, they'll say, see, we knew you were just faking this. So we have to be very careful, especially with our own relatives, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunties, and so forth. They remember when we were younger and maybe we were engaged in sense gratification. So for them to accept us as genuine representatives of Krishna is difficult, especially if previously we were engaged in sense gratification. However, by remaining meek and humble and always being respectful toward relatives and friends, eventually they'll realize that you are genuine. And at that point, they will hear your preaching, but not until that platform is achieved. And it could take a long time before they accept you as some kind of a sincere authority in Krishna consciousness. That's why we have to be very patient and accept the path of Krishna consciousness with full vigor and faith and devotional service and not be in any way disrupted in the practice of pure devotional service. Then, over a period of time, people will say, well, I didn't think they were serious, but now I'm convinced that my son or my cousin is serious because over the years, he or she has not wavered and is always engaged in devotional service. And that's a good example that she or he might continue the rest of their life engaged in devotional service. So therefore, I can accept this person as a genuine sadhu. So it takes a long time to convince people of one's sincerity and one's complete dedication to being Krishna conscious. At first, they will be skeptical, saying, well, I remember when you were smoking marijuana and going out here and there. Yeah, that's a fact. They can remember that. But to convince them now that you've given up those habits, it takes some time. Therefore, they're going to examine you very carefully. And if you pass the test of complete surrender to Krishna and always being gentle and kind to all people and being Krishna conscious in every situation, then they might, over a period of time, give respect to you as a genuine devotee. So the hardest people to convince of your Krishna consciousness is usually your friends and relatives because they can remember when you were not Krishna conscious. Right? Okay, well, thank you very much, my dear devotees. If there are any other questions, you can ask them now, or comments, you can give them now. And if not, in the next minute or two, we'll wait patiently. And if there's no more discussion, we will adjourn.
Hare Krishna Maharaj ji.
Yes. Hare
Uh,
Krishna.
yeah, my question is that how many hours we should need Bhagavatam, and should I write? Yeah, and if I didn't read the Bhagavatam Canto 1, 2, 3, should I important? Should I can I switch for fourth canto or fifth canto like that? This is my question.
Well, there's two things. There is your reading of the Shastra in a regulated way, going from the beginning to the end, every day, uh, you know, reading, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 pages and trying to assimilate what you've heard. And the other is coming to classes, but the classes might be way ahead of where you're situated in the Shastra. So that you shouldn't say, well, I'm not going to listen to this because it's way uh, more, let's say, uh, complicated than, so I want to start from the beginning myself. No, you can start at any point in the Shastra. And if you hear carefully and ask questions, you will not be confused. If you don't hear carefully and don't ask any questions, you'll be confused about what's being said, especially if you come in the middle of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But if you are patient and you and you listen attentively and you ask questions, you will understand. Even if you come in the middle of the Bhagavatam and having missed the beginning because you were not yet a devotee or you were lazy or whatever, that's okay. Any part of the Bhagavatam is transcendental, and any part of the Bhagavatam can be understood if one is sincere. And anything you don't understand, you can ask questions. You will learn by asking questions. And you will be able to, even if you come, even if everybody else has started from the beginning and they're in the middle of the Bhagavatam, and you come at the middle of the Bhagavatam, that's all right, because Bhagavatam is eternal. We should not read it just once. We should, if when we come to the end of the Bhagavatam, immediately we should begin again from the beginning. So it's just an eternal process. It is not something that is will o' the wisp. Meaning you hear something and right away you forget it. Okay. So As soon as we finish the whole Bhagavatam, we'll go over it again from the beginning. Why? Because the Bhagavatam never becomes hackneyed, meaning stale, boring. It's always full of transcendental knowledge. And every time we read it, we realize, oh my God, I read this before, but now I'm seeing something that I didn't see before. That's oftentimes happens because the Bhagavatam has many, many different levels of realization. And when we're more and more purified, then we can go more deeper into the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Okay, my dear devotees, any other questions or comments? Did I answer your question, Mataji?
Yes, yes, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki jai.
Jai.
Chant Hare Krishna and be happy, especially today. It's a nice day today. Haribol. All glories to Prabhupada ki jai.